In the quiet corners of Wyoming, where the land stretched endlessly and the sky seemed to touch the earth, there lived a young woman named Sarah. She was not extraordinary in appearance, but her eyes carried a depth that spoke of dreams and struggles alike. Her life had been a mix of joy and hardship, but nothing could have prepared her for what lay ahead. Sarah was pregnant, carrying a child she had hoped would bring happiness to her small family. But fate had other plans. Her husband, James, was once a man she believed would stand by her side through thick and thin. He had courted her with promises of love and security, filling her heart with hope for the future. Yet as the months passed and her belly grew rounder, James began to change. The weight of responsibility seemed too much for him to bear. His smiles turned into frowns, his affection into indifference. Sarah tried to hold on, to remind him of the vows they had exchanged, but it felt like talking to a stranger. Deep down, she feared the worst, though she never imagined how cruel it would be. One cold winter evening, as the wind howled outside their small cabin, James finally revealed the truth. He sat across from Sarah, his face pale under the flickering light of an oil lamp. His voice trembled as he confessed that he could no longer stay with her. "I'm not ready for this," he said, gesturing toward her swollen belly. "I can't do it." Sarah's heart sank as she realized he meant every word. She pleaded with him, tears streaming down her cheeks, but James wouldn't listen. His mind was made up, and nothing she said could change it. The next morning, James packed a few belongings into a sack and loaded them onto his horse. Sarah watched in disbelief as he mounted the animal, his eyes avoiding hers. "You'll manage," he muttered, before spurring the horse forward. Sarah called out to him, begging him to reconsider, but he didn't look back. As his figure disappeared into the distance, Sarah fell to her knees, clutching her stomach as sobs racked her body. The world around her felt empty, the silence deafening. She was alone, abandoned, and utterly unprepared for what came next. Desperation set in quickly. Sarah knew she couldn't survive long without help. The nearest town was miles away, and the biting cold made travel nearly impossible. Still, staying put wasn't an option either. With trembling hands, she wrapped herself in a thin shawl and stepped out into the icy wilderness. Each step was agony, the frozen ground biting at her feet through the soles of her worn shoes. The wind cut through her clothing like a knife, and her breath came in shallow gasps. Yet she pressed on, driven by the instinct to protect the life growing inside her. Hours passed, or perhaps it was days. Sarah lost track of time. Hunger gnawed at her stomach and exhaustion clouded her mind. She stumbled often, falling to her knees only to force herself back up again. Her vision blurred and her thoughts became jumbled. At one point she collapsed near a cluster of rocks, too weak to continue. Curling into a ball, she whispered prayers to anyone who might hear her. "Please," she begged silently, "don't let my baby die." As night fell, the temperature dropped even further, and Sarah's consciousness began to slip. Just when all hope seemed lost, a faint sound reached her ears, the rhythmic pounding of hooves against the frozen earth. Through half-closed eyes, she saw shadows moving in the darkness. A group of riders approached, their silhouettes illuminated by the dim light of torches. They were Cheyenne warriors, returning from a hunt. Their leader, a tall man with piercing eyes and a weathered face, spotted Sarah lying motionless in the snow. Without hesitation, the warrior dismounted and knelt beside her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, speaking softly in a language she didn't understand. Though she couldn't comprehend his words, the warmth in his tone reassured her. Wrapping her in a thick blanket, he carefully lifted her onto his horse. The other warriors gathered around, their faces showing concern as they assessed her condition. Together, they rode swiftly toward their village, determined to save the fragile life they had found. When they arrived, the entire tribe sprang into action. Women hurried to prepare a warm bed for Sarah while others brewed herbal teas to revive her. The warrior who had rescued her stayed close, ensuring she received the care she needed. His name was Red Hawk, and though he rarely spoke, his presence was calming. Under the watchful eyes of the Cheyenne people, Sarah slowly began to recover. The warmth of the fire and the kindness of strangers brought color back to her cheeks and strength to her limbs. Despite the language barrier, Sarah found ways to communicate with her rescuers. Smiles, gestures, and shared glances bridged the gap between them. The women of the tribe took special interest in her, teaching her simple tasks like weaving baskets and grinding corn. They marveled at her determination, seeing in her a spirit that refused to break. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. These people who owed her nothing had taken her in and treated her as one of their own. Yet beneath the surface, Sarah's heart remained heavy. Memories of James haunted her, replaying his betrayal over and over in her mind. She wondered if she would ever find peace or if the pain would always linger. Nights were the hardest when the world grew quiet and her thoughts turned inward. But even in those moments, she found solace in the gentle rhythm of the village and the steady presence of Red Hawk, who seemed to understand her sorrow without needing words. Little did Sarah know this was just the beginning of her journey, a story of survival, resilience, and unexpected connections. The road ahead would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine, but it would also reveal the strength within her. And though she couldn't see it yet, the kindness of the Cheyenne people and the bond she was forming with Red Hawk would shape her destiny in profound ways. Sarah's days in the Cheyenne village began to take on a rhythm that felt both foreign and comforting. Each morning, she woke to the sound of children laughing and dogs barking as the sun painted the horizon with hues of orange and pink. The air smelled of burning wood and freshly baked bread, a stark contrast to the icy loneliness she had endured just weeks before. Though she still struggled to understand the language spoken around her, the people's actions spoke louder than words. They smiled at her, offered her food, and included her in their daily routines. Slowly, Sarah started to feel like she belonged. Red Hawk, the warrior who had saved her, remained a constant presence in her life. He didn't speak much, but his actions showed his care. Every evening he would bring her a bowl of stew or a cup of warm tea, sitting quietly beside her as she ate. Sometimes he pointed to objects, a tree, a horse, a river, and said their names in his language. Sarah tried to repeat them, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. Red Hawk's lips would curve into a small smile when she got it right, and she found herself looking forward to these moments. It wasn't just about learning words, it was about building trust, something she desperately needed after everything she had been through. The women of the tribe were especially kind to Sarah. One of them, a young mother named Morningstar, took Sarah under her wing. She showed Sarah how to grind corn using a stone mortar, how to sew leather into moccasins, and how to prepare medicinal herbs for teas. Morningstar's patience was endless, and she never grew frustrated when Sarah made mistakes. Instead, she laughed softly and encouraged her to try again. Through these lessons, Sarah began to regain her confidence. For so long, she had felt useless and broken, but now she was learning new skills and contributing to the community. It gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Despite the kindness surrounding her, Sarah couldn't shake the memories of James. At night, when the fires burned low and the village grew quiet, she would lie awake staring at the ceiling of the teepee she shared with Morningstar. Her mind replayed the moment James rode away, leaving her alone in the snow. She wondered if he ever thought about her or the baby growing inside her. Did he regret his decision? Or had he already moved on, forgetting her completely? These questions tormented her, keeping her trapped between anger and sadness. One day, while Sarah was helping Morningstar weave a basket, Red Hawk approached them. He gestured for Sarah to follow him, leading her to the edge of the village where the horses grazed. There, he pointed to a sturdy brown mare and mimicked riding motions. Sarah tilted her head, confused. "You want me to ride?" she asked hesitantly. Red Hawk nodded, holding out his hand to help her onto the horse. Though nervous, Sarah accepted his offer. With a little assistance, she climbed onto the mare's back, gripping its mane tightly as Red Hawk mounted his own horse beside her. They rode together across the open plains, the wind whipping through their hair. For the first time in months, Sarah felt free. The vastness of the land stretched out before her, untouched and wild. Red Hawk led her to a secluded spot near a crystal-clear stream, where they dismounted and sat in silence. After a while, he pulled out a small pouch from his belt and handed it to her. Inside were dried berries and pieces of jerky. Sarah ate slowly, savoring the flavors as she watched the water ripple in the sunlight. Red Hawk studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but firm. "Strong," he said, pointing to her chest. "You. Strong." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. No one had called her strong in a very long time. She had spent so many days believing she was weak, incapable of surviving on her own. But here was this man, this stranger who had saved her life, telling her she was capable. It was more than just a compliment. It was a lifeline. Sarah nodded, trying to hold back her tears. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure if he understood. But Red Hawk's slight nod told her he did. As the weeks passed, Sarah's bond with Red Hawk deepened. He continued to teach her bits of his language, and she began to pick up phrases here and there. She learned to say thank you, he, friend, ho'onineste, and home, heataneoo. These words became anchors, connecting her to this new world she was slowly becoming a part of. In return, Sarah taught Red Hawk some English words, laughing whenever he mispronounced them. Their shared laughter created a bridge between their two worlds, one that neither of them could have predicted. But not everyone in the village was as welcoming as Red Hawk and Morning Star. Some of the older members of the tribe eyed Sarah with suspicion, whispering among themselves when they thought she wasn't listening. They saw her as an outsider, someone who didn't truly belong. Sarah noticed their glares and heard the hushed tones, but she chose to ignore them. She knew proving herself would take time, and she was willing to work for it. Every day she pushed herself harder, learning new tasks and helping wherever she could. She wanted to show them that she wasn't just a burden. They had saved her life, and she intended to honor that. One afternoon, as Sarah helped gather firewood with a group of women, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. One of the women mentioned seeing a white man in the distance riding toward the village. Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Could it be James? Had he come back for her? Panic surged through her veins as she dropped the sticks she was holding and rushed to find Red Hawk. When she found him sharpening his knife near the warrior's camp, she grabbed his arm, her breath coming in short gasps. "White man," she managed to say. "Coming." Red Hawk's expression darkened. He stood quickly, calling out to the other warriors. Within minutes, the entire village was on alert. Weapons were readied, and the women and children were moved to safety. Sarah stayed close to Red Hawk, her hands trembling as she scanned the horizon. Soon enough, a lone figure appeared on horseback, silhouetted against the setting sun. As he drew closer, Sarah's heart sank. It wasn't James, it was a trader, his wagon loaded with goods. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. The encounter reminded her of how fragile her newfound peace was. The outside world still loomed large, threatening to disrupt the sanctuary she had found. That night, as Sarah lay awake once more, she realized something important. She wasn't the same person she had been when James left her for dead. She had survived the impossible, been embraced by a community that owed her nothing, and discovered a strength within herself she never knew existed. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them, not as a victim but as a survivor. And though she couldn't predict what the future held, she knew one thing for certain: she was no longer alone. As the days grew longer and the snow began to melt, life in the Cheyenne village took on a new energy. Spring was arriving, bringing with it the promise of renewal. The fields were prepared for planting, the horses were let loose to graze on fresh grass, and the children played under the warm sun. For Sarah, this season marked a turning point. Her body had grown heavier with her pregnancy, but so had her spirit. She no longer saw herself as an outsider looking in. She felt like part of the tribe, connected to these people who had given her a second chance at life. Morning Star continued to guide Sarah through the changes happening within her own body. "The baby will come soon," Morning Star said one day, pressing a hand gently against Sarah's swollen belly. Though Sarah understood only a few words, The meaning was clear. A mix of excitement and fear bubbled inside her. She had never imagined raising a child without James, but now she couldn't picture doing it any other way. These people, her new family, would be there for her every step of the way. Still, the thought of childbirth frightened her. What if something went wrong? What if she wasn't strong enough? Red Hawk seemed to sense her unease. One evening, as they sat together near the fire, he handed her a small wooden carving. It was shaped like a bird, its wings spread wide as though ready to take flight. Sarah held it carefully, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "For you," Red Hawk said simply, pointing to her heart. His gesture touched her deeply. She realized he was trying to tell her that she could rise above her fears, just like the bird in the carving. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the tiny sculpture tightly. The bond between Sarah and Red Hawk had grown stronger over time. They spent hours together, riding horses across the plains or sitting quietly by the river. Red Hawk taught her how to track animals, identify edible plants, and listen for signs of danger in the wilderness. In return, Sarah shared stories about her old life, the cabin she once called home, the dreams she used to have, and even the pain James had caused her. Though Red Hawk didn't understand every word, his attentive gaze told her he cared. He didn't offer solutions or empty promises. Instead, he listened, letting her pour out her heart until she felt lighter. But not all moments were peaceful. Tensions occasionally flared within the village, especially among the elders who still doubted Sarah's place among them. One day, while Sarah was helping weave blankets with the women, an argument broke out nearby. Two older men were speaking, loudly, their voices sharp and accusing. Sarah caught fragments of their conversation, words like outsider and danger. Her cheeks burned with shame as she realized they were talking about her. Morningstar noticed Sarah's discomfort and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't listen," she said firmly, switching to broken English. Good. You belong here." Sarah nodded, grateful for the support, but the incident stayed with her. She couldn't help wondering if she would ever truly earn the trust of everyone in the tribe. That night, as she lay awake in the teepee, she resolved to work even harder. If proving herself meant staying up late to finish chores or volunteering for the toughest tasks, then so be it. She wouldn't give anyone a reason to doubt her worth. Her determination was put to the test sooner than expected. A few days later, a sudden storm swept through the plains, catching the villagers off guard. Dark clouds rolled in quickly, and fierce winds knocked over baskets and scattered supplies. Everyone rushed to secure their belongings and protect the livestock. Sarah joined the effort, ignoring the ache in her back as she helped tie down tents and gather loose items. When the rain began to pour, she hurried to check on the food stores, ensuring nothing was damaged. By the time the storm passed, she was soaked to the bone and exhausted, but proud of what she had accomplished. Red Hawk found her sitting by the fire afterward, shivering despite the warmth of the flames. Without a word, he draped a thick blanket around her shoulders and handed her a cup of hot tea. "You brave," he said softly, meeting her gaze. Sarah smiled weakly, feeling a surge of gratitude. Moments like this reminded her why she loved being part of this community. Even when things got tough, they pulled together, supporting one another without hesitation. As spring turned into summer, Sarah's due date approached. The women of the tribe gathered around her, preparing for the arrival of the baby. They showed her how to make cloth diapers from soft deerskin and taught her soothing songs to sing to the newborn. Morningstar even gave her a small pouch filled with herbs, explaining that they would help ease the pain during labor. Despite her nerves, Sarah felt surrounded by love and care. She knew she wouldn't face this moment alone. One sweltering afternoon, as Sarah rested in the shade of a tree, she felt a sharp pain ripple through her abdomen. At first, she thought it was just another false alarm, but when the pains came again and stronger, she knew it was time. Panic flickered in her chest, but she pushed it aside, remembering the lessons she'd learned. Taking a deep breath, she called out for help. Within moments, Morningstar and several other women appeared, guiding her to a secluded area where they had set up a birthing space. The hours that followed were some of the hardest Sarah had ever endured. Each contraction felt like a wave crashing over her, threatening to pull her under. But the women stayed by her side, encouraging her with gentle words and firm hands. Red Hawk waited outside, pacing back and forth as the sounds of Sarah's labored breathing reached him. He clenched his fists, torn between wanting to rush in and knowing he had to stay out of the way. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a cry pierced the air, a tiny wailing sound that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "It's a boy," one of the women announced, holding up the squirmsheng yu yiga xin ming. The cry of the newborn echoed through the air, filling the space with a sense of wonder and relief. Sarah lay back, her body trembling from exhaustion, but her heart swelling with joy. The women cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him gently in her arms. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she gazed at the tiny face looking up at her. His skin was reddened from the effort of being born, his eyes squeezed shut, and his little fists clenched tightly. He was perfect. "He's beautiful," Morningstar said softly, smiling as she touched the baby's cheek. Sarah nodded, unable to speak through her tears. She had never imagined this moment, holding her son for the first time, surrounded by people who cared for her deeply. It felt like a dream, one she never wanted to wake up from. For so long she had carried fear and doubt inside her, but now all she felt was love. Pure, overwhelming love. Red Hawk waited outside, his pacing finally coming to a stop when he heard the baby's cry. He exhaled deeply, the tension in his shoulders easing. One of the women stepped out and motioned for him to come closer. "It's a boy," she told him, her voice warm with pride. Red Hawk nodded solemnly, though his eyes betrayed his happiness. When he entered the birthing area, Sarah looked up at him, her face glowing despite her weariness. She held out the baby toward him, inviting him to see. Red Hawk hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. He knelt beside Sarah and peered down at the tiny bundle in her arms. The baby squirmed slightly, letting out a small whimper that made Red Hawk chuckle softly. "Strong," he murmured, echoing the word he had once used to describe Sarah. She smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. This child, like his mother, had already shown resilience in the face of challenges. Red Hawk reached out tentatively, brushing a finger against the baby's hand. To everyone's surprise, the infant grasped it tightly, refusing to let go. For the next few days, the entire village celebrated the arrival of the new life. The Cheyenne people believed that every birth was a blessing, a sign of hope and continuity. They sang songs, danced around the fire, and shared stories late into the night. Sarah named her son Elijah, a name she remembered from her childhood. It meant, "God is my strength," and it felt fitting after everything she had been through. The tribe embraced the name, repeating it until it rolled off their tongues easily. As Sarah adjusted to motherhood, she found herself leaning on the support of those around her. Morningstar stayed by her side constantly, helping her nurse Elijah and teaching her how to care for him. Other women brought food and gifts, small moccasins, carved toys, and blankets woven with intricate patterns. Even the elders who had once doubted Sarah seemed to soften, their stern expressions replaced with smiles whenever they saw Elijah. Babies had a way of bringing people together, and Elijah was no exception. Red Hawk continued to play an important role in their lives. He visited often, bringing fresh meat or firewood and checking on Sarah and Elijah. Sometimes he would sit quietly near them, watching as Sarah fed the baby or rocked him to sleep. Other times he would hold Elijah himself, cradling the infant with surprising tenderness. Sarah noticed how natural he looked with the baby in his arms, and it made her heart swell even more. Though neither of them spoke about it, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond forged through shared experiences and mutual respect. But not everything was easy. Motherhood brought its own set of challenges, especially for someone like Sarah, who had no experience caring for a newborn. There were nights when Elijah cried endlessly, leaving Sarah feeling helpless and overwhelmed. She worried that she wasn't doing enough, that she might fail him somehow. On those nights, Red Hawk would appear unexpectedly, carrying a cup of tea or simply sitting with her until the baby fell asleep. His quiet presence was comforting, reminding her that she didn't have to face these struggles alone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah sat outside her teepee with Elijah nestled against her chest. Red Hawk joined her, sitting cross-legged on the ground nearby. For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the village winding down for the night. Then, without warning, Red Hawk spoke. "You brave," he said, pointing to her. "Elijah. Lucky." Sarah blinked, surprised by his words. She had always thought of herself as ordinary, someone who stumbled through life making mistakes. But hearing Red Hawk call her brave changed something inside her. Maybe she was stronger than she gave herself credit for. As the weeks passed, Sarah began to feel more confident in her role as a mother. Elijah grew quickly, his cheeks rounding out and his grip becoming firmer. He started recognizing voices, turning his head toward Sarah whenever she spoke. He also responded to Red Hawk, cooing softly when the warrior came near. It was clear that Elijah adored him, just as Sarah did. The three of them formed a unique, little family, one built not on blood but on trust and love. Yet, despite the happiness she found in the village, Sarah couldn't completely forget her past. News eventually reached them about James. A trader passing through mentioned seeing him in a nearby town, remarried and living a comfortable life. Sarah listened to the story with mixed emotions. Part of her felt anger. How dare he move on so easily while she had suffered so much? Another part of her felt pity, wondering if he ever regretted abandoning her. But mostly she felt nothing, at all. James was no longer part of her world. Her focus was on Elijah and the future they were building together. One day, as Sarah walked along the riverbank with Elijah strapped to her back in a carrier, she spotted Red Hawk fishing nearby. He waved her over, holding up a freshly caught trout with a grin. Sarah laughed, shaking her head at his antics. As they sat together by the water, sharing the meal he had prepared, she realized something profound. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. The pain of her past hadn't disappeared entirely, but it no longer controlled her. She had found a new purpose, a new home, and a new family, and for the first time in years she felt truly at peace. That night, as she tucked Elijah into his cradleboard and settled down beside him, Sarah whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. Life had thrown her into chaos, leaving her battered and broken, but it had also led her to this moment, to a place where she was loved, respected, and valued. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to face it, whatever it might bring. As the seasons changed once again, autumn painted the Wyoming landscape with vibrant shades of red, orange, and gold. The air grew cooler, and the mornings were filled with a crispness that hinted at the approaching winter. Life in the Cheyenne village continued its steady rhythm, but for Sarah, this season carried a deeper significance. It marked her first full year among the tribe. A year that had transformed her from a broken woman abandoned by her husband to a mother raising her son with strength and dignity. Elijah was growing quickly, his laughter becoming a constant soundtrack in the village. He babbled happily, reaching out to touch everything he could get his hands on. His curiosity delighted everyone around him, especially Red Hawk, who often squatted beside the toddler as he played with wooden toys or chased after the village dogs. There was something magical about the way Elijah lit up whenever Red Hawk appeared, toddling toward him with arms raised for a hug. To Sarah, it was clear that their bond went beyond words. It was built on trust, care, and shared moments. Sarah herself had grown in ways she never thought possible. She no longer felt like an outsider looking in. She was deeply woven into the fabric of the community. The women treated her as a sister, sharing secrets and stories during their work together. The men respected her resilience, acknowledging how far she had come since the day Red Hawk found her near death. Even the elders, who had once been skeptical, now nodded approvingly when they saw her helping others or contributing to the village's well-being. Yet life wasn't without its challenges. One afternoon, while Sarah was teaching Elijah to stack stones near the riverbank, a group of white settlers rode into the village unannounced. Their arrival sent ripples of tension through the tribe. These settlers weren't traders or travelers. They were searching for land to claim, eager to expand their farms and settlements. They spoke loudly, gesturing at the fields and water sources as if measuring them for their own use. Sarah watched nervously from a distance, clutching Elijah close to her chest. The leader of the group, a tall man with a thick beard, approached Red Hawk and the other warriors. He tried to negotiate, offering trinkets and promises in exchange for permission to settle nearby. But the Cheyenne refused, their voices firm and unwavering. This land was sacred to them, passed down through generations. It wasn't for sale or negotiation. The standoff lasted for hours, with neither side willing to back down. Finally, the settlers left, muttering under their breath about returning with reinforcements. As they disappeared over the horizon, the villagers gathered around the fire to discuss what had happened. Sarah listened intently, her heart pounding. She understood enough of the conversation to realize that trouble might be coming. The settlers wouldn't give up easily, and their presence could bring danger to the tribe. Her mind raced with questions. What would happen if they returned? Would the Cheyenne be forced to fight? And where did she fit into all of this? Though she had found a home here, she couldn't ignore the fact that she was still, in many ways, tied to the world those settlers represented. Red Hawk noticed her distress and pulled her aside later that evening. "You safe," he said firmly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We protect you." His words were simple, but they carried immense weight. Sarah nodded, grateful for his reassurance, but the worry lingered. She knew the Cheyenne were strong and skilled warriors, but she also knew the power of the settlers' numbers and weapons. For the first time in months, fear crept back into her heart. Despite the looming threat, life in the village continued as usual. Sarah threw herself into her daily tasks, finding comfort in routine. She helped grind corn, weave baskets, and prepare hides for winter clothing. Every evening she sang lullabies to Elijah, rocking him gently until his eyes closed in sleep. On some nights, Red Hawk joined them, sitting quietly by the fire as Sarah talked about her hopes and fears. He didn't always respond, but his presence was enough to calm her racing thoughts. One chilly morning, as frost covered the ground like a thin blanket, Sarah decided to take Elijah to visit Morning Star. The young mother had recently given birth to her second child, a baby girl named Willow. Sarah admired the way Morning Star balanced motherhood with her responsibilities in the tribe, and she hoped to learn more from her example. When she arrived at Morning Star's teepee, she found the new mother cradling Willow while humming a soft tune. "Come," Morning Star said, motioning for Sarah to sit beside her. She handed Willow to Sarah, who held the tiny infant carefully. Elijah crawled over, fascinated by the new arrival. He reached out to touch Willow's face, his expression curious and gentle. Watching her son interact with the baby filled Sarah with warmth. She realized how much he had grown, not just physically, but emotionally too. He was kind, observant, and full of love, qualities she hoped to nurture as he grew older. As they spent the morning together, Morning Star shared advice about raising children in such uncertain times. "Teach him to be strong," she said, pointing to Elijah, "but also teach him kindness. The world is hard, but we can make it softer for each other." Sarah nodded, committing the words to memory. She wanted Elijah to grow up understanding the value of compassion, even in the face of adversity. Days turned into weeks, and the threat of the settlers loomed larger. Scouts reported seeing more wagons heading toward the area, their intentions unclear. The Cheyenne prepared for the worst, sharpening weapons and reinforcing defenses. Sarah did what she could to help, sewing extra clothing and gathering food supplies. She also made sure Elijah stayed close, keeping him safe within the heart of the village. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Red Hawk sought Sarah out. He led her to a quiet spot overlooking the plains, where they sat together in silence for a while. Finally he spoke, his voice low but steady. "If trouble comes, stay here with Morning Star. Protect Elijah. Sarah opened her mouth to protest. She didn't want to hide while the others risked their lives, but Red Hawk cut her off. "You promise me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, she agreed, knowing he was right. Her priority was Elijah, and she couldn't let anything happen to him. The following days were tense, with everyone on edge. Then, one morning, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the plains. The settlers had returned, this time in greater numbers. Armed men rode into view, their expressions grim. The Cheyenne warriors stepped forward, shields raised and bows ready. Sarah watched from a distance, her stomach churning with anxiety. Elijah clung to her leg, sensing her unease. For hours, the two groups faced off, their voices rising and falling like waves. Just when it seemed a fight was inevitable, an unexpected figure emerged from the settler ranks. A preacher, his Bible clutched tightly in one hand. He spoke of peace and coexistence, urging both sides to find common ground. Slowly, reluctantly, tensions began to ease. A compromise was reached. The settlers would settle farther away, respecting the boundaries of the Cheyenne land. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough, for now. When the settlers finally left, the village erupted in celebration. Songs rang out, and dances filled the night. Sarah joined in, holding Elijah high above her head as she twirled around. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to feel relief. The danger had passed, at least for the moment, and her family was safe. Later that night, as Sarah tucked Elijah into bed, she reflected on everything she had endured. She had faced betrayal, abandonment, and fear, yet she had emerged stronger than ever. She had built a life filled with love, purpose, and belonging, a life she never imagined possible. And though challenges still lay ahead, she knew she could face them. After all, she wasn't alone. She had Elijah, Red Hawk, and the entire Cheyenne tribe standing beside her. Together, they were unstoppable. Winter arrived with a vengeance, blanketing the Wyoming plains in a thick layer of snow. The Cheyenne village adapted to the harsh conditions, retreating into their teepees and relying on stores of dried meat and corn. Smoke curled lazily from the tops of the dwellings, mingling with the frosty air. Inside Sarah's teepee, warmth radiated from the central fire, where Elijah sat bundled in furs, playing with a wooden rattle Red Hawk had carved for him. Life had settled into a quieter rhythm, but Sarah knew this peace was fragile. The memory of the settlers' arrival lingered like a shadow, reminding her that the outside world could intrude at any moment. Sarah spent most of her days caring for Elijah and helping Morning Star with her newborn daughter Willow. The two women had grown close, sharing stories and laughter as they worked side by side. Morning Star often teased Sarah about Red Hawk, winking whenever he passed by or lingered near their teepee. Sarah would blush, brushing off the comments, though deep down she couldn't deny the growing connection between them. Red Hawk wasn't one for grand gestures, but his steady presence spoke volumes. Whether it was bringing her fresh firewood, teaching Elijah how to hold a bow, or simply sitting quietly with her during long winter nights, he showed her in small ways that he cared. One evening, as the wind howled outside, Sarah sat cross-legged by the fire, sewing moccasins for Elijah. Red Hawk entered silently, shaking snow from his shoulders before taking a seat beside her. He watched her work for a while, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he reached into his pouch and pulled out something wrapped in soft leather. Handing it to Sarah, he gestured for her to open it. Inside was a delicate necklace made of turquoise beads and silver charms. Sarah gasped, running her fingers over the intricate design. "For you," Red Hawk said simply, his voice barely above a whisper. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she held the gift. She had never received anything so beautiful, let alone from someone who understood her heart so deeply. Without thinking, she leaned forward and hugged him tightly. Red Hawk stiffened for a moment, surprised by the sudden affection, but then relaxed, returning the embrace gently. In that moment, words weren't necessary. They both knew what this bond meant, not just to each other, but to Elijah, who giggled happily from his spot by the fire. As the weeks passed, Sarah found herself imagining a future she hadn't dared to dream of before. Could she build a life here permanently? Could she raise Elijah among these people, who had shown her more kindness than she ever thought possible? These questions swirled in her mind, but she kept them to herself, afraid to jinx the happiness she had found. Still, the idea took root, growing stronger with each passing day. Spring returned slowly, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land. The tribe celebrated the changing season with ceremonies and dances, honoring the earth and its gifts. Sarah joined in, feeling more connected to the Cheyenne traditions than ever before. She learned songs in their language, participated in rituals, and even helped prepare offerings for the spirits. It was during one of these ceremonies that Red Hawk approached her, his face unusually serious. "We must talk," he said, leading her away from the festivities to a quiet spot near the river. The water sparkled under the sunlight, reflecting the vibrant colors of blooming flowers along the bank. Red Hawk hesitated, searching for the right words. Finally, he spoke. "You belong here," he said firmly. "With us, with me." His gaze locked onto hers, unwavering. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. She had suspected his feelings for her, but hearing him say it aloud left her speechless. I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling. Red Hawk reached out, taking her hand in his. "Say yes," he replied, his tone soft but resolute. "Stay with us. Be my family." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she nodded, overwhelmed by emotion. For the first time in her life, she felt truly wanted, cherished not because of obligation or duty, but because of who she was. The news of their union spread quickly through the village, met with cheers and celebrations. The elders, who had once doubted Sarah, now welcomed her fully, seeing her commitment to the tribe and her love for Red Hawk. A ceremony was planned to formalize their bond, blending Cheyenne traditions with elements of Sarah's own heritage. On the day of the wedding, Sarah wore a dress made of soft deerskin, decorated with beadwork crafted by the women of the tribe. Red Hawk stood tall beside her, adorned in ceremonial regalia that symbolized his role as a warrior and protector. They exchanged vows beneath the vast Wyoming sky, surrounded by friends and family. Sarah felt a profound sense of belonging. This was her home now, a place where she was loved, respected, and valued. Elijah clapped excitedly, oblivious to the significance of the moment, but thrilled by the joy around him. Even Morning Star wiped away tears, hugging Sarah tightly afterward. Life. After the ceremony continued much as it had before, but with a deeper sense of unity. Sarah and Red Hawk worked together, raising Elijah and contributing to the village. They taught him about both worlds, the traditions of the Cheyenne and the Ibai stories of Sarah's past. Elijah thrived under their care, growing into a curious and confident child. He idolized Red Hawk, mimicking his movements and begging to learn how to ride a horse. Sarah marveled at how natural it all felt, as if fate had always intended for them to find each other. Yet the outside world remained a constant threat. Over the years, more settlers encroached on Cheyenne lands, bringing conflict and hardship. Sarah worried about the future, knowing that tensions could boil over at any moment, but she refused to let fear dictate her life. Instead, she focused on building a legacy of resilience and hope for Elijah. She wanted him to grow up understanding the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity, while also embracing compassion and unity. Years later, as Elijah grew into a young man, Sarah looked back on her journey with gratitude. She had faced unimaginable pain and loss, yet she had emerged stronger than ever. The Cheyenne people had saved her life, not just physically but emotionally and spiritually. And Red Hawk, he had given her a love she never thought possible. Together they had created a family rooted in trust, respect, and shared purpose. On ER. Quiet evenings as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to twinkle overhead, Sarah would sit with Red Hawk and Elijah, watching the fire crackle softly. She would tell Elijah stories of her past, of the hardships she endured and the lessons she learned. "Never forget," she would say, "that strength comes not from being fearless, but from facing your fears head on. And kindness, it's the greatest weapon we have against hatred. Elijah listened intently, his eyes wide with admiration. He understood the weight of his mother's words, knowing that he carried within him the legacy of two cultures, two worlds. As he grew older, he vowed to honor that legacy, becoming a bridge between the Cheyenne people and the settlers who sought to understand them. Through him, Sarah saw the promise of a brighter future, a future built on the foundations of love, courage, and unity. And so Sarah's story came full circle. What had begun as a tale of despair transformed into one of triumph, a testament to the power of human connection and the resilience of the human spirit. She had been left for dead, but she had risen like a phoenix from the ashes, finding not only survival but true happiness. Her journey was proof that even in the darkest moments light can shine through, and sometimes that light takes the form of unexpected allies, newfound families, and boundless love.